This is Simon Howard, and he's gonna ask the question, are Windows listening? So give him a nice applause so he can get a bit welcome in here.
Yeah, that better? Okay, yep. So I had it on mute. Okay, I'm Simon Howard. I'm from a little country called New Zealand. I'm going to be talking about, are the vendors listening? So this is a look inside the Magic Quadrant, and that's the Gartner Magic Quadrant. I'll talk about that a bit later. Okay, so I'm a security engineer, and I work for a large MSSP, which is a managed security service provider in New Zealand. Large by New Zealand standards is like 20,000 users. So in Europe, I think we're just like, it's like your home basement sort of MSSP. Started life as a coder, and now I like building things like big managed services, and I like breaking them as well. So it's fun. And I also like burnouts. Okay, so what the whole idea for my talk, or looking at content SMTP filtering products, was there's lots of great research being done in the community. So we've got like Ofer Erkin, who was talking about the bypassing next solutions yesterday or today, I think. PTAC and Newsham, they've done lots of work on IDS evasion and denial of service. Caswell and HT Moore, they did more IDS bypass techniques that you could use on your IDSs that you buy to see how good they actually are. And Anton Rager did a lot of work on breaking various IKE implementations. So what I did was, a guy called, I did this talk in New Zealand, or a similar one about, and I couldn't pronounce his name. I was saying Three Papa, and a Russian guy came out of the audience to go, oh, his name is Z Raza, and that's so I got that pronunciation sorted for today. He released a paper in 2002 called Bypassing Content Filtering Software, or Bypassing Content Filtering. A couple of guys called Marks and Ackerman, I think they work for Virus Bulletin. In 2002, they took Ziraza's original paper and they wrote up like 500 or so test cases and sent it out to 43 different vendors. And these are techniques to get past the vendors' content filtering engines, right? They sent them all out, and then they waited 6 months, and then they published all the responses from the vendors. All the vendors were like, yes, we're going to patch this, or coming out on the next release, and we've tested all your filtering bypass techniques, and nope, they don't work on our products. So after a while, Ziraza, he updated his paper. Now it rolls along, it's 2007. And I thought, well, surely all these vendors, all their products are going to be secure as, because these techniques from back in 2002 may have been updated a bit, but they'll be keeping an eye on this white paper. They'll be like getting it every 5 minutes and doing an MD5 sum to make sure it hasn't changed from 2002. So I took it and then I ran it against some SMTP filtering products to see what the story was. So Ziraza's original paper mentions a few vulnerable clients, but mainly it's a brain dump of bypass techniques. It isn't like specifically saying on Semantic, on IronPort, on ClearSwift, these techniques work. It's just saying, here's some techniques, they may work, I'm not sure. Some people have tried them. So I wanted a focused test set of products, and so I chose products that have got a place in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. What Gartner do is, if your product has sold lots and lots of copies and it's worth millions of dollars, then you may be able to, Gartner may come to you and say, we want to include you in our Magic Quadrant, and they'll analyze your product and see how well it does spam filtering and virus filtering, and how adept your content filtering engine is at stripping attachments and doing other fancy tricks. So this quadrant is broken down into 4 quarters. There's the leaders, which was Semantic and IronPort that I chose. There's a lot more other than these, but these were the main ones I chose. Some visionaries, challengers, and there's also niche players, but I didn't want, an example of a niche player is SendMail, and you're lost anyway if you're using SendMail. A quotable quote from this paper that I particularly like. The market is defined by vendors that provide enterprise protection against inbound email threats and fulfill outbound policy requirements at the SMTP gateway. So that's a quote out of their report for that year. I think in quarter 1, 2008, perhaps they're releasing the next version of this paper. And they don't just do it for email security products, they do it for IDS and disk encryption and yeah, lots of different products. Okay, so I needed a method to do my testing with. So I needed a file type to prove if the attachment stripping techniques were working or not. VBS came across as a good one because you can't do true type file detection on it. It doesn't start with a magic header like MZ. It's just source code basically in a file, and it's not like Perl or Python or something where you got your shebang and then you got user bin m for Python. Yeah, it's just some plain text that is default executable on Windows. So here's my wee test script here. Hello world. What I then did was installed and configured each of the products. So I chose 8 different SMT boundary filtering products, as you saw before from my Gartner, that are selected from the Gartner quadrants. And I configured each of them as per the user documentation to strip or to deliver filtered messages to postfix. So it would strip the attachment. I set it up strip startup VBS, or maybe on the product it'll have like malicious attachment stripping, and that includes VBS, so I'll tick that box. Or maybe I have to write some custom filters, but the documentation tells me how to do this, so I'll go along those lines, configure it how any normal user would do it. That was my goal. Then pump all the test cases in, and then retrieve the filtered messages with my mail clients and see what the result was. I was hoping that I wouldn't see anything. I was hoping it's going to be stripped attachments across the board. Well, I wasn't really hoping that, because then I wouldn't ever talk. Okay, so here's a wee diagram of the environment. Message comes in, attachment stripped, pops into postfix, and then I've got a POP3 client on there, Dovecot, and I pull it out with the email clients, and I've got malformed mail. Okay, so the products that I tested. Before I said, so here's the exact versioning. If you've got these at home, then you can follow along. Proofpoint, they're pretty cool because they give you a VMware virtual image. So for testing purposes, I had VMware set up, and then I'd have Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and then I'd have a Debian, and then I'd have a Windows XP and a Windows 2003. Because each of the products, one of them may not work on XP, might like 2003 better. So I had to go across the board, but Proofpoint, you just chuck the VMware image into VMplayer and crank it up, and you can do your testing. It's great. IronPort, you actually need one of their appliances, so it's a bit harder. But luckily we're friends with IronPort, so they gave me one to test. Yeah, and they are the vendors there. Now the email clients, because I'm fiddling around with attachment file name extensions and the way that it's rendered, sometimes they aren't going to be visible in all the clients, which I'll show you and explain to you later. But Outlook Express, Thunderbird, I completely forgot about Outlook 2007 because our standard build on our desktops at work was still Windows 2000 at the time. But I would like to test it sometime. I'm pretty sure it's fairly the same as Outlook 2003. They hadn't changed much in the rendering engine there. And of course, dirty old Lotus Notes. Okay, the control file. So this is what the control file looked like so that I could send it through the engine and test that attachment stripping was working as intended. So I just used, unfortunately I'm not a Python zealot like a number of people here today. I love my Perl. See, I have a show of hands for Perl programmers here. Terrible. So I used the Perl MIME Lite libraries and constructed up this email. You can see here, this is base64 encoded hello world. Well, it's not actually hello world, it was some other VBS script that I nicked off the internet, but it's not malicious, just pops up a message box and says something. Okay, and close up, this is what it looks like. So you've got your content disposition, and your attachment file name equals VBS, and then you've got your content type, application octet stream, file.vbs. So it's basically telling the email client and the filtering product that there's a VBS file in that email. Now, I needed to modify this various ways as according to Zeraz's paper, to get past the SMTP filtering products. I base 64 and quoted printable, encoded the file name. I injected a few nulls here and there, sort of along the same lines of Brett Moore's same bug, different app stuff. And then I removed non-vital sections of the MIME. So here's a list from Zeraz's original paper of all the different modifiers that I attempted. So we've got encoded file names, multiple file names, null bytes, unsafe fgets, trying to do buffer overflows. None of the clients were susceptible to that, thankfully. UU encoding, changing the case sensitivity is something as simple as that. Missed MIME version, so I'll go through these in a bit more depth. Okay, so initially I had about 118, I think, I can't remember the exact number of test emails, and then I cut that down to 58 really solid test cases. For some of them, the email attachment, like with the control file, it would be stripped by all products. So I'm not going to bother including that in my test results because all the email clients can render it and all the content filtering products can strip it. Similarly, if I've got a test case that none of the email clients can render, then there's no point in including it because it's not going to be a malicious file. And I got some fairly interesting results. Okay, so we'll start with the content disposition and fiddling around with the way the file name is represented inside the email. So there's some pretty simple things that I did here. Normally, your file.vbs is represented inside quotes or ticks. I took those ticks off. I put the ticks at the front. I put an extra dot in front of things. I took the ticks out completely, put one tick in there. This US ASCII is a character set, and then Q is quoted printable, but then I didn't quoted printable my file name. So that if it was quoted printable, it would be equals, and then the quoted printable thing for an F, but I just put it in there straight out. And the same with base 64. That's not base 64 encoded, that's just plain text. So the results of how the email filtering products interpret these names and how the email clients interpret these names is what I'll show you next. Okay, so this is for test case number 1, content disposition. I'll go into this in closer detail because it's quite hard to see from afar. But the white dots, on the left-hand side you've got 5 email clients, and on the right-hand side you've got the 8 filtering products. So if you've got a white square in the email filtering product side, that means that attachment isn't valid. It can't see it, basically. And likewise on the right-hand side, if you've got a white square, it means that attachment wasn't stripped. So there's a few dots in there, so it's kind of interesting. Let's have a look at it closer. So here's just the first 4 test cases. In the email clients, the first 2 test cases, which were, if we go back here, file.vbs, and with and without the quotes, it was rendered successfully. Test case number 3, Outlook Express, Outlook 2000, Outlook 2003, they all rendered that attachment successfully, but in Lotus Notes and Mozilla Thunderbird, they didn't know what to do with it. So test case number 3 is with the 2 quotes at the start. So okay, that's kind of interesting. And on test case number 4, Notes knew what to do with it, but Thunderbird was still lost. And this is what the invalid attachment would perhaps look like. Now this is from test case 15, as you can see in the subject line, but it just looks mangled. It's a tilde and a bracket and a caret, so you're not going to be able to double click on that and execute the VBS code. Similarly in Notes, what a beautiful email client it is. You can see here the file name is just some kind of crazy DAT file. Yeah, that's not VBS. Hands up here who uses Lotus Notes as an email client. By choice? No. Yeah. Look at that. Simple, nice, clean, terrible. And if the email attachment is valid, it's going to look like this, file.vbs. Simple. So from the other side of the graph, how we had the big diagram there before, we see here with those first two test cases, all the products stripped them, no worries. But as soon as we started playing with it a little bit more, remember we had the 2 ticks in the front, file.vbs, proof point, oh, what do I do with that? I'll just let it through. Similarly, trend micro, surf control, Sophos pure message, we'll just let that through. Now, if this was a executable file like file.exe and it had the MZ header, then the chances are these products are going to be able to strip it because they're just looking for the MZ pattern. As soon as they see that, they look inside the MIME boundaries. Here's where the attachment sits. I'm going to pull it straight out. But because it can't do any file type checking, it's got to rely on looking for that attachment extension name to strip the file. And it's seeing these double quotes and going, what? There's no file name at all. And it just lets it through. Okay, and this is what it looks like as you'd expect when the attachment is stripped. Okay, so the next thing I did, or one of the other test cases, was a different file name. So here in the content disposition, we've got test.txt, and in the content type, we've got test file.vbs. Now what's the email client going to do with that? Is it going to render it as test.txt, which I'll be able to double click on it, but it won't be a VBS file, it will just be the VBS code? Or will it show me file.vbs? Similarly, file.vbs and test.txt in the opposite order. I also had it pointed out to me that if you flip content type and content disposition actually around, so the first line is content type and the second line is content disposition, that also fools the clients and the filtering software, or more so the filtering software than the clients. Or how about having 2 content dispositions? Yeah, that also messes with it. But I didn't test that, I just got told it after the fact. Okay, so test case 1, we've got test.txt file.vbs, and Outlook Express, it's choosing the VBS file, so it's choosing the second one. So is Outlook 2000, 2003. Lotus Notes and Thunderbird, they play with test case 2, so they choose the one out of the content disposition rather than the content type. So there's some interesting results here. The iImport developers seem to be using Thunderbird or Lotus Notes as an email client to test these things. So they're thinking, oh, this attachment isn't visible in Thunderbird, so why should we strip it, perhaps? Or maybe they're just not even thinking about stripping it. The likes of Mail Marshal and Trend Micro, they know that there's a malicious VBS file in there somewhere, perhaps, so they strip both lots. Symantec, I think they're all away on holiday when all this stuff was going on, because they don't strip anything there. Okay, null byte. This is another same bug, different app. So I've got, you can see here on the right hand side, we've got file.vbs, and then I'll put a null in here, and then we've got .txt. So what's the content filtering product going to do with that? Is it going to read that string in, and as soon as it hits the null, it's going to go, oh, this is a malicious VBS file, I'm going to strip it? Or is it going to read the whole string in and think, oh, this is a text file, I'm going to let it through? Similarly, is the email client going to read it all in and think, oh, I've hit the null, that's it, file.vbs? So you really have to think, or the email client is going to probably do something different from the SMTP filtering product. So here's the results of that. So it's there's quite a few gaps in there. You can see with test case number 2, that I think, I'm not sure which test case, this might have been test case number 1 or 2. No, it was number 2. Lotus Notes didn't like it, but all the other clients did. Mail Marshal, he must have been reading right the end to the text file. Yeah, but it's rendered in that client. Similarly there in test case number 5, sometimes I was base64 encoding the null or quoted printable encoding the null. I fiddled around with it a whole bunch. So you can see it'll be fine Lotus Notes. Quite a few banks, especially in New Zealand, use Lotus Notes, so it's quite a good target. Surf Control, that strips it. And it looks like code theft and reuse isn't a problem.
Have you tried the reverse too? First the text extension, then the nullbyte, and then the
Yes, yeah. So with the nullbyte one here, there was 7 test cases. Number 1 was originally, it was stripped by all vendors and it didn't render in all clients. So this is just one of the test case examples. I did modify it 7 different times using different flipping and such. Yeah. And the thing about code theft and reuse, normally if code theft and reuse was a problem, you'd see some vendors would have exactly the same results as the others for all of the test cases. So I've got the accompanying white paper here, which will be available on the DeepSec website and on my website. And you would assume for all the test cases here, if they'd stolen, like the Sophos pure message code is written in Perl, so you can easily download it and you can just turn it into your application. But that doesn't seem to be happening here, which is a good thing. If I had probably looked at some Chinese products or some other country who like stealing code perhaps, then you could see a bit of reuse, but it doesn't seem to be a problem. Simple bugs. So UU encode. We all know what UU encode is. We've UU encoded file names before. This command first appeared in BSD4 in the 1980s, and these 3 vendors here can't strip UU encoded attachments. It's pretty poor. The strange thing is these are the 3 vendors that have Unix-based appliances. So you'd think they'd know. Okay, so across the board, after I did all my test cases, 58 test cases, here's the results. So for the email clients, Thunderbird can render the most wacky, malformed, trippy email attachments with 72% success rate. And in old Outlook Express 6, it wasn't so flash. In Outlook 2003. In Lotus Notes, that was the worst. Or was it the best? Should we be rendering these attachment file names? So I think the reason that a lot of these clients here are rendering these malformed attachments is due to broken applications. There's so many different applications out there that have been written poorly, and we'll get, say it's a web server or something that's flicking out email notifications about website updates, and it's got an attachment on it, but it's a bit malformed. Someone's gone back to Microsoft and say, hey, I really need to read this attachment. Can you fix up your client so it works with it? And so that's what they probably have done, just to be nice to their users, for user friendliness' sake. And there's also RFC compliance. RFC 2231, for example, is a standard where you can have your file name, if it's longer than 255 characters, split up into multiple content dispositions. So you've got file name 0, like an array, equals the first 255 characters, then the second 255 characters. Now this RFC's been around maybe 5 or 6 years, but only Thunderbird's adopted it. It's kind of a strange one. And nearly, if we look at the global results here, if we get down to RFC 2231, yeah, there we can see that only Thunderbird renders these attachments, wherever my mouse pointer's gone. This line of 1s here, and then only Ironport, and I think the other one might have been Proofpoint, can strip them. So it's a kind of a strange thing. I don't know why Thunderbird adopted it and installed it, because there's perfectly valid workarounds for the problem. Okay, now look at the boundary security products. Now, a higher score here is better. You want to be stripping these attachments. We can see Proofpoint and Ironport, they're down below 50%, which is kind of bad. Sophos, yeah, 52%. And then we've got ClearSwift, a clear leader, with 84. And then TrendMicro, 83. Not too bad. Okay, so what I did with these results, if you're familiar with the Gartner Magic Quadrant, you've got your as we had at the start, we've got the niche players and the visionaries and the leaders. So I was loath to what the salesperson would do with my results. They're going to say, oh, we got an 84% in Simon Howard's attachment stripping, bypass, filtering, blah, blah, blah. So I constructed Necromancer's quadrangle that they could use in their sales reports if they wanted, but they'd look kind of silly. So we've got ClearSwift up the top there. Those guys are pretty proactive. They're keeping an eye on Z-Raz's bypass filtering paper and seeing what you guys are saying in the industry. Trend Micro are good as well. Monaural, so the Surf Control and Sophos, they've got the deaf in one ear. They're kind of listening to what's going on. They've got some mitigation strategies there, but they're not really working on it. Amnesic, Ironport, Semantic Proofpoint, all the way back in 2002 when Marks and Ackerman notified them of these issues, they responded to these guys saying, I think Ironport were the only one who weren't around back then, or though in a different guise. They said, yeah, we've fixed it, we're keeping an eye on it, we've sorted it out. But in reality, they probably did it for those first test sets back in 2002. Come 2007, they're not really keeping an eye on it. And I can probably see people from that amnesic space moving into the reactive column as threats are realized, as viruses start using these techniques, and then popping back into the amnesic column when they've fixed that problem, but they're not really forward thinking, not being proactive about it. So that's just a quick definition of those terms. So what are the implications for this? Well, viruses and lots of them. There's already been some viruses using these techniques in the wild. Circam, Badtrans, Jibe, it's like some of them have had the multiple file name extension, like you've got filename.doc.exe. So they're kind of pretty basic transforms on those bad attachment file names. Pattern-based virus detection, we've already seen lots of great talks about why it doesn't work and why it's not going to stop this kind of thing. Heuristic and sandboxing may work to stop these threats because depending on how they pull out that attachment from inside the body of the email message, they may be able to execute and know, hey, you're calling these, why you're trying to connect to a website or send an email. But when you've got virus writers and you've got virustotal.com, you've got new viruses and new variants that are undetectable basically, or that for the period of time will be undetectable. And we've seen examples of that today as well. All they need to do is set up, keep modifying them and sending them through VirusTotal until it's undetectable. Or they can create a magic email. So get the content, so look at go back to the PDF here. So if they don't really know what email client the target is using at the other end, they could choose a content disposition, one that gets past most of the filters, and multiple file name one, and put all those three malformed attachment names into one email, send it through, and chances are it's going to get your Lotus Notes, it's going to get your Outlook, it's going to get your Thunderbird, and it's going to get past all of the SMTP filtering products out there. So in conclusion, after looking at all those vendors and getting the results back, the majority of them aren't listening. We've got about a 51% success rate across the attachment stripping techniques for these vendors. How do we make them listen? Like, we pay a lot of money for these products. Take your business elsewhere, or tell them it is an issue. Like, for example, one of our vendors back home, I always beat them up and say, look at these bugs, look at these problems here. And they come to us at the end of the year and say, hey, we'd like to raise the support contracts by $20,000. And I say, and I write up the paper of all my findings and all these bypass techniques and then send it over to them, and they're like, oh, yeah, you can stay in your current contract, don't worry about it, extra 20 grand. So you have to make them listen. Or I could sell my research to the Storm crew or post it on 29A, but that's just going to make more trouble for me because I'm the one at the end who has to deal with all this crap coming through my system. I wouldn't do that. Okay, so ideas for further research. I'd like to test all the web-based email clients like Gmail. I did try Gmail with this test set, and it's pretty damn good. So as soon as you're sending the email through, as soon as it sees that content disposition or type or that bad attachment name starting, just drops the connection, gives you a 500 back. A few of them did get through, and none of them were renderable in Gmail email client itself, but the people who pop their email back off Gmail, then you could get them like that. I've got a friend who works for Google though, so I've told him about them and he'll patch them. And all the techniques I have discussed today, all the holes I found in all the vendors' products, they were notified about this about a month ago. And I won't be releasing my test cases into the wild unless someone specifically wants them. If any of the vendors here that I didn't test want them, then just let me know. I'd like to try out Hotmail and Yahoo. I tried Hotmail, but they didn't like my IP address. They said I was blacklisted or something. Kept dropping my messages. And Message Labs, they're an interesting one because they've got the 100% non-detectable virus sort of thing going on, and that they'll give you your money back if you get some malicious code in your inbox. So, is anyone here from Message Labs? Or does anyone here use Message Labs as an email provider? No? I'll be interested to try it and see if any of these malformed attachments come through. And I could always add my test cases to Metasploit or Canvas or something. Probably won't do that though. Who knows? Okay, so the white paper is available there on my website, research.mints.ac.nz, and go forth and test your products.
Are these test cases you developed online? Because I'd like to test that against my setups, not using any of the commercial products, but it would be very nice to know.
I haven't put them online because that just gives easy access for the script kiddies or the Storm crew or something to just grab them, and it's already pre-cooked for them. Even though all these techniques are detailed back in 2002 and it's in Zeraz's white paper, I haven't released them out in the public. I'll make them work for their 0 day.
Would you send that if I send you an email?
Yeah, if you flick me an email and I think you're not going to be using them for bad purposes,
no,
and
I don't.
Have a look at the white paper as well, because it
fine. Thanks.
And beat your vendor up. Yeah.
Hey, were there any test cases that got through all of the vendors' filtering? Was there anything that you found that bypassed everything?
I think, and there was pretty much there was one case where at least one vendor would pick it up.
Right.
Because I used eight vendors, at least one case where there'd always be one vendor that picked it up. But in that case, if I did have a case where it went through all, it probably isn't going to be renderable in all the email clients. Cool. Yeah, but that's why you use a magic email with like multiple bad attachments on it. Yeah.
And it'll get.
Or you can use SMTP scan as well, which is some dudes from Grey Hat Security to fingerprint their mail server, so you work out what it is. Send an email through, get a bounce back from Notes, then you know they're using Notes. Get a bounce back from Exchange, you know they're using Outlook, and then use that as your vector.
Like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any more questions? Do you really think that some of these vendors are actually listening the security community? Because if people like Symantec were listening the security community, I think we would have figured out for quite some time now. My question is more, is their customers actually listening to the security community? Because when I look at the Symantec customer base, it's huge. And obviously these people, because I think their products are pretty crap, but they keep selling and selling and selling around, and for years. And like what we see with Microsoft, unless the client really get pissed off by the product, they won't change their way of selling the products.
Too many people take this stuff for granted. They just think because on their vendor's website it says 100% secure or no viruses, that it's going to do that. that's why you get people, employ them within your teams to go and do this research, send them off to hacker conferences like this one, computer security conferences. You need to have a person, at least one or two in your team, doing this kind of stuff, beating up your vendors, making sure. But you are right that the majority of the cases, your clients, they don't know what's going on, and they just blindly believe what you say and what your salesmen say to them.
Yeah, but going to conferences is great, but here in that room, I think we're most IT security practitioners, hackers, and blah, 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 and we all convinced on this fact, so we will just keep talking among each other.
Yeah.
And the question is, when is the information is getting out of this? So maybe we're not targeting the right crowd when we're just presenting our results, and me including, and my work as well. I mean,
What I'll do when I get back to New Zealand is run an overview of all the presentations that I've been to here, and invite all of my staff on my floor, even if they're not security, even if they don't know anything about it, and try and disseminate that knowledge across everyone. And that's what each of you need to do when you go back to your place of work. Give a rundown of this conference and say, hey, this is what went down, these are some different things to think about, because a lot of things talked about at this conference are applicable in everyday life, like the e-voting talks and the healthcare, e-health talk. Yeah, it's up to us as well to help spread this knowledge and the word. And it's kind of hard to get people as enthused about security as we are a lot of the time, but yeah. Good question though. Anyone else? Yep.
That's fine to contact all the companies, but how would you contact the home users?
Well, it's up to the companies to protect the home users. It's not up to me to tell all the home users. Yeah.
Yeah, but by the use of their clients.
Yeah, the clients, I can see. So Microsoft shouldn't be rendering these malformed attachments. So, but then like what I said before, they've probably done it over a series of years ago to deal with some buggy email client or malformed emails. So I don't see it as the people who write email clients' fault. I see it as the email vendors' fault. Yeah. Thanks for letting me borrow your laptop too. All right.
If there aren't any more questions, I have to thank you for speaking here.